Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Today's episode is one that cuts to the core of what it means to show up and perform under pressure. Not just once, but again and again when it matters most. I'm joined today by Dr. Dan Dworkis, an emergency physician, chief medical officer at the Mission Critical Team Institute and founder of the Emergency Mind podcast. With deep experience in medicine, science, and elite team performance, Dan is internationally recognized for his work helping mission critical teams like ours perform better under stress, recover more effectively, and evolve with intention. In this conversation, we delve into what it really takes to wire your brain for performance under pressure, and more importantly, how to teach that skill within our teams. We explore what makes high-stakes environments so demanding, why rest and recovery are not optional, and how to maintain a life of service without destroying ourselves in the process. We'll talk about why things often go wrong in emergencies and what most people misunderstand about their ability to perform. We'll talk about the culture and mindset that help mission-critical teams welcome new members and grow together. And we'll talk about the residue left behind by high-pressure calls and how to manage that without burning out. We'll also talk about how to have better conversations with ourselves, our teammates, and even our families about what we do and why it matters. So whether you're navigating the fireground, the ER, or another frontline of crisis, this conversation is a toolkit for longevity, leadership, and personal growth. This isn't just about being tough. It's about being intentional, because performance, recovery, and evolution are all part of the same mission. I'll see you on the other side. First responders, firefighters, emergency doctors, any or none of the above. We all face emergencies in our lives, and when we're in those moments that we have to must or thrust into moments where we have to make critical decisions in high stakes, uncertain, pressure-filled environments, even the best possible training, bringing our knowledge to bear and the stress and pressure of the moments can be super overwhelming. That's a direct pull, as you'll probably know from your book. What do you think most people get wrong?
That sounds really smart.
It's actually smart to you, brother. That's why. What do you think?
I agree with everything he's saying.
When anticipating or predicting their own ability to perform in high stakes, pressure-filled environments, what do you think they get wrong when they think, I would act like this? This is what I would do.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, first off, I think that the lived reality of crisis is hard to explain to folks that don't live in that space. Mm-hmm. And there's, I think one of the ways that becomes more obvious is just if you take something that you've done on maybe a previous shift, and it's a sick kid, or it's somebody who's shot, or it's a burn victim, or whatever it is, and you think about how you deployed your skill set, you worked the problem, your team came together, and you got an outcome, and then you went back home and sort of dusted yourself off. And that, for folks that aren't in this world, that might be the worst thing they've ever seen in their entire life, right? That might haunt them. That might keep them from sleeping. And for you, that's just Thursday, man. You're just that was the third case on Thursday, and then you went to the fourth case on Thursday. So it's different when you're outside of it. One of my colleagues and mentors, Preston Klein from Mission Critical Team Institute, talks about the extraordinary world and the ordinary world, right? The ordinary world is supermarkets and walks in the park and hard stuff and working hard at work and whatever. But the extraordinary world is this space where you go into this thing where it's life and death and it's chaos, and it's just different than what you're normally facing. So I think the first thing is that if you've never experienced that, then it's really hard to predict what happens to you when you're in that, because it's just not like anything you've ever felt. And just to say this out loud, emergencies are not just worse versions of bad days. They are qualitatively different. When you were in crisis, things are just qualitatively different. Not just quantitatively, but qualitatively different. So it's worth a conversation for a moment about what an emergency is. This is probably pretty obvious to folks listening to this, but the reason I call this out is because it gives you a little bit of boundaries for this, right? So in the book, I talk about pressure, uncertainty, and impact. Right, so impact's probably the easiest, life or limb or some sort of catastrophic failure if things don't go the right way. uncertainty, you don't know enough about the situation, the problem set, or the right response. And then pressure, there's some mismatch between resources and needs. Usually for us, it's time or oxygen in one form or another, right? Like we don't have enough oxygen in the patient to make the decision the way we want to. We don't have enough oxygen in our tank. We don't have enough theoretical, like not even literal oxygen, but just sort of as a metaphor oxygen to get the job done. And then I think since I wrote the book, I've added two things to that list. One is complexity. I don't know if you all have talked about complicated versus complex systems on the podcast before, but
we have, but some listeners may not recall it. Please take us into it, because it is, people use the words interchangeably and they are very different.
Right, absolutely. So you can imagine three different systems, right? So a simple system is like a lever or a screwdriver or a table or whatever. It's just pretty basic. Complicated systems are ones where you have a lot of parts, but you can take the parts, you can disassemble it, you can look at the parts, you can understand them, and you can put it back together. So a car engine is usually the model for that. Now, I gotta be honest, I don't really understand how a car engine works. It's not my forte. But theoretically, you could take.
You're a smart man, so in a month of mechanics and
figure it out, right?
Physics, you'd get it. It's just a series of steps. There's just a lot of steps involved.
Exactly. And each thing you can study and learn by itself and then reassemble. And the thing you reassembled would still work as a car engine, right? Versus a complex system has interactions between the parts. And those interactions are part of the fabric of its being. You can't separate them out from the thing itself. So a human body is a great example of that, right? Our liver, our lungs, our heart, our kidneys, they all work together in order to create who we are. You can't take one of them out, look at it for a while, put it back in, and then assume it's going to work the same way, right? If you just had a kidney, it's not its own thing. It only exists in the context of the whole person.
But when we throw that analogy onto teams as well, we then put into it someone's motivation, assuming a motivation is the same for everyone, a power dynamic, a sense of belonging, a sense of urgency or pressure. Again, all of these will be different for everyone. So which brings ever more present elements of complexity to a situation that's already complicated. This episode is brought to you in partnership with Godiva Limited. Godiva is one of the world's leading providers of specialist equipment for emergency services market. Renowned for innovation, quality and reliability, Godiva produces a comprehensive range of fire pumps, including vehicle-mounted, portable, and their cutting-edge integrated total water flow control system, SAMFlows. I've been using Godiva my entire career as a reliable pump on the fire ground. It is such a crucial element of a successful firefighting team that you want to empower your crews with the very best, reliable, quality product. Reach out to our partners by checking the notes in the podcast. Now back to the show.
Exactly. And complexity, like you just said, exists at multiple scales. So the problem set you're facing is complex in an emergency. It has interacting parts that have non-linear reactions. It's hard to see around the corner about what happens next. And then the team that you address that with has complexity. So now you have two complex systems smashing into each other at high speed, like in kinetic environments. There's a lot of complexity in that. And then the last component of an emergency, perhaps the most important for us, is this thing called liminality, which is not a word I really used at all before I started thinking this through. But liminality is the sense that you've crossed a boundary and now you're moving in a specific direction and the only way out is through. You can't unspool what happened. So the best example of this for me is you have jumped out of an airplane, right? You cannot jump back into the airplane. You have to solve that problem. You have to land successfully either through performance or catastrophic failure, or like a Deus Ex Machina, somebody swoops you out of the sky or whatever. But basically, you have committed yourself to a path and you now have to walk that path. So that's pretty obvious for us in crisis, right? Like the person stopped breathing. We are in a cardiac arrest scenario. We are in a liminal situation. You have to go forward and either work the problem. You either solve it or you don't. But you can't like undo that fact and be like, oh, wait a minute, let me just take a few more minutes to think about it.
You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. And equally, in those moments, the idea of indecision, well, indecision is a decision in itself because everything else is still moving forwards. Everything else is still happening, but now it's happening to you. And it's not, you're not actively part of the solution of it or in the outcome.
I think that's spot on, right? So, So we started this whole sort of line of thought by being like, what do people get wrong about how they're doing it? And I think the first thing is that if you've never been in situations that have those factors, it's hard to predict. The other side of that coin, interestingly, is that emergencies are all kind of like each other in some sense. Mm-hmm. So you and I can have this conversation despite our jobs being pretty fundamentally different on a lot of levels. Mm-hmm. But you've been in crisis and I've been in crisis. And so we can have this conversation about, well, what does crisis feel like? Mm-hmm. What does it feel like to come into and out of a crisis? What happens in a crisis? What happens after? How do you talk to people in it? All this stuff. And it's sort of weird, right? Like it doesn't have to be that way, right? It could have been that firefighting is so different than everything else that really the only thing that you can talk about is firefighters. But it turns out not to be true. The same way for medicine, which is kind of cool because it gives us the chance to learn from each other and to talk to each other and to not be so fucking lonely as we're handling all these crises, right? Yeah.
I always think with incidents and perhaps the patients as well, incidents don't repeat themselves, but they often rhyme. You know what I mean? No two of them are the same, but they rhyme. If you tilt your head to the side and slightly blur your vision, there's many of the similar chapters to each incident, each patient, each crisis, and there's many tenuous threads that you can draw between the two of comparative moments of often complexity where things could have gone either way. There was a great book called Black Box Thinking. Have you ever read it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got it right over here actually. Yeah, Matthew
Syed, wonderful book. Mm-hmm. There's a chapter at the beginning of that where he talks about Elaine Bromley right at the beginning. And she was a young lady who went in for a standard operating procedure. And her husband, Martin Bromley, was a pilot. And I know I say this ad nauseum on the podcast, so people will be rolling their eyes. They'll skip past the one for 30 seconds now. But he sent his wife in for this routine surgery, and he went with his two daughters just to get some food for them. And they were going to pick Mummy up in the afternoon and take her home. And she went through the anaesthetist and was put under, and then they struggled to intubate her as she went into the operating theatre. Mm-hmm. And they spent a long time trying to intubate her. And the nurses there had the tracheotomy kit, and they were trying to offer it as a solution because they kept, and again, my terminology would be terrible here, you'll probably have to correct me, but they would keep trying the same methods of intubation, and they called in more and more doctors into the room. But the hierarchy and the unspoken authority within the room didn't allow for open communication, for a diversity of thought as ways to solve this problem. And you can see that happening across many sectors where certainly in the fire service, it's not always necessarily the incident commander who has all the ideas. They're there to take responsibility. A doctor's there to take responsibility. They don't have to have all the solutions or all the ideas necessarily. And I think that's a common mistake that leaders make in crisis, is thinking they need to be the hero, they need to be the solution, where really sometimes they just need to be the soft hand on the tiller, directing the chaos and taking responsibility and providing space and opportunities for psychological safety and thought and idea and solution from those that are at the tip of the sword or perhaps have a different way of thinking about the solution. And anyway, Martin took the idea of crew resource management, which is something that gets spoken about in black box thinking, and you hear this in some of the black boxes, like Sully on the Hudson. The way that they communicate in those moments of crisis, the invitation of ideas or alternatives from less senior members of the team. It's a very different way of operating in crisis because, like you say, what we do is very, very serious and has grave consequences, but it doesn't always have to be, because obviously within the title of the book and within sort of the overarching idea of our conversation today is this aspect of pressure. And I think that pressure's all self-created. I'm going to propose that idea and feel free to challenge me on it, because like I might say, I feel the pressure of speaking to Dan today. Okay, so why is Dan making you feel pressure? Well, Dan, is impossible for you to make me feel pressure, because the only pressure I will feel is the gravity and weight and importance that I place upon our conversation. That is what creates the pressure. Pressure is just my perception of how important this situation is. Now, there's people all over the world dying right now. There's somebody getting raped, someone's snatching a child. There's a there's a premise about a child drowning in a river. I don't know if you've ever heard it, so let's say, Dan, you've come out the hospital and you have a look to the side and there's a river there and there's a child drowning in the river. What are you going to do about it? What would you do about it? Real life question. What are you going to do about it?
Oh, call for other resources and go in after it, probably.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's 30 feet away. You're going to do something about it. Now, what if you leave the hospital, you get in your car, and you're 2 minutes away, and you hear on the radio that there's a child drowning in the river next to the hospital? What are you going to do about it? You might still do something. You might do nothing. What if it's 3 miles away? What if it's in the next country? Mm-hmm. Now, it doesn't change the fact that there is a crisis taking place, and there's something to do with our perceived role in it, our perceived responsibility. Like I always say to firefighters, we didn't create the problem. We're there to solve it, and we're there to bring calm to chaos, but it's not our fault. Sure. And it's probably harder for people in the medical profession, I don't know, because when you don't perhaps get the outcome that you want, you have a very direct, I would imagine at times, interaction with the family members. And there will probably be a very heavy weight of responsibility that you should have done more, you should have done different. I think it's easier for us to dissipate that responsibility because there's often 20, 30 firefighters and we go, oh, well, we all did the best we could. The building just burnt down and we didn't get there in time or whatever. How do you frame pressure in the role that you do?
Yeah. All right, that's super worth talking about. There's a couple threads here that we have to untangle before we dive into this. So, first, I think your comment that a lot of pressure is self-inflicted is probably true, but I don't think that I could say all pressure is self-inflicted.
Okay.
Right? You show up at work and the stateside version of your team has scooped a child in cardiac arrest and brought them into the ER, and that child's in front of you now. There is pressure in that situation for you, for the child, for the family, for the community, for everything else that goes on around that. And that's not in your head, right? That's real. And also there's probably extra layers of components about performance anxiety and your sense of self and all of the other stuff that layers on top of it. So I think it's both, right? I think there's a real external component and an inner lived monologue component to it that are adding.
I'd agree.
And additive and potentially supportive, right? Like sometimes pressure can be good for you. You say, I want to perform at a level that I want to be at, right? It's not always bad. It's a tool like anything else is.
Well, the outcome for us is life and death, isn't it? But if we put this, and I think we often make this mistake, and again, sorry for interrupting, but like when we compare it to the Super Bowl or the world final football match, do you know what I mean? Or whatever. Enormous pressure. No one's going to die. But arguably as much pressure? I don't know. Surely, again, not all of that will be self-created, but it's the perception of how important this is. Because it isn't life and death at that level, but it's certainly a tremendous amount of pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a challenging amount of pressure, right? And I think the folks that live in that space have different techniques and are arguably better in some ways at handling some of the pressure than what we do. And we can talk about that too, because I think the operational tempo that you face these things at, the failure tempo that you face, the way that your system is set up around you makes a big difference in your own ability to buffer and handle this. But I want to go back to something else, and then we can flash forward to that.
Please,
again.
sorry. My ADHD drags me all over the place. Carry on. I'll try not to interrupt.
I get it. You talked about what's it like to go through a case where there's a bad outcome, right? And what do you feel about that, and how do you put that on yourselves versus dissipate it and everything? And I think that's just incredibly important to talk about, right? So... in part because what's the opposite of that, right? If you don't talk about it, what happens, right? Well, you go home, you internalize it, and you might think to yourself. So imagine a cardiac arrest, right? So you're working it in the ER, You have paramedics that brought the folks in cardiac arrest. They've been working the case for 15 minutes on the ride in or whatever. You get it. You're a junior doctor. You're running the cardiac arrest. You have nurses around you. You have senior doctors, but there's other stuff going on. So it's you and you're running it. And for whatever reason, can't get the patient's heart started again. Patient dies. Family's there. They're screaming. They're crying, which is totally normal and reasonable. Right? They have their entire universe has just changed, and it's Tuesday for you, but it's not a good Tuesday, right? So you have some choices that you have to make here, right? First off, if you don't do anything and you don't talk about it and you don't think about it, what tends to happen is some version of what you said, which is that you assume that performance and outcome are linked. Right. So this is a really important concept. I first got this from Annie Duke in her books on decision making in poker. Performance is how well you did your job. From a Stoic philosophy point of view, how well did you control the parts of the universe that are under your control? Right. Outcome is what happened. You don't control all of the outcome. We live and work in worlds where performance and outcome are not totally coupled. They're not uncoupled. Our performance matters, but they're not totally coupled. I can be the best doctor on the best day of my life, operating at the peak of skill, and my patient can still die.
We can get it all right and still no.
Right. And in part, that's because, and just to say this out loud, I'm an imperfect person. Medicine is an imperfect science, and I practice medicine imperfectly. That's just reality, right? I won't ever be the best doctor in the universe at the best day of my life at the best everything. And even if I could, the patient still might die. It's not totally coupled.
The complexity of the human being, I think, and again, I'm not being self-deprecating, but part of me thinks that makes your job harder. Like one of the guests we had recently, I was like, firefighting is just physics and chemistry. We like to romanticize it. It's just physics and chemistry. Now, yes, to an extent, and it is all of those things. But the complexity of a building, again, should be fairly generic. There's probably less variations in buildings than there is in bodies, but the way someone manages that building, the things they choose to put inside it, the way they've chosen to treat it, will have an outcome on the way that it behaves when it's in chaos. But I imagine the bodies are significantly more complex, and you can do everything right more often and probably not get the higher success rate that we perhaps get.
I don't know.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together.
I'm not sure. I'd have to really think about that, right? You'd have to really think about what the complexity levels are of the things and how the systems behave when they're reaching certain flash points, sort of pun intended on that, right? Yeah. As you're getting into stuff. And I think it's like just to zoom out, I think it's worth saying both of these are spaces where performance and outcome are not totally coupled. There's coupling between them, but they're not totally coupled. So if you don't think about that, and this happens a lot for juniors in my space, I wonder if it's true for yours as well, you tend to believe that a bad outcome was because of bad performance. You default to that belief. This was terrible. This patient died. Therefore, I'm terrible. I'm a waste of space. I'm a terrible doctor. I shouldn't be here. I wasted all this training. I've let my family down. I've let my community down. My mom hates me. And it just sort of goes down this death spiral. Yeah. And it's funny to say that, right? Because ending a spiral and my mom hates me is kind of a ridiculous thing to say. And I do that on purpose because it is ridiculous. It's ridiculous to assume that your whole community hates you because of one thing like that.
Well, I think it all spirals down to love. If you do the Tony Robbins whys, it's like, well, why does that matter? Well, if people don't think I can do my job, then they won't have faith in me. Why does that matter? If people don't have faith in me, then they won't trust me. What does that matter? If they don't trust me, they won't love me. Do you know what I mean? And it all comes down to that. We're pack animals. well, I need to have a purpose in this group. My identity is intrinsically linked, and you have this with first responders especially. Who I am and what I stand for is 80% of my personality. You have that with a lot, certainly with doctors,
Well, and I think that as we get more gray hair and more scars going through this, we get better at having this conversation with ourselves, right? Or we don't, or we burn up, right? You either get better or you explode, right? If you explode, you go down a path that typically looks like, burnout and self-destruction and frequently alcoholism or drug abuse, divorce, isolation, and potentially suicide, right? And loss of sense of self. That's one path. There are other paths, and those paths are the ones that we see when you find somebody who's an elder in the community, like a grandfather or a grandmother, who you look at them and you're like, wow, like this person has been through the shit, and they've found a way to transform it into this incredible fuel and this incredible sense of who they are as a human being, right? And one of the things that person did somewhere on that journey, right? They have more gray hair, they have more scars. They start thinking to themselves better versions of that conversation. And instead of being like, this happened, therefore I'm a horrible human being and I deserve to be ostracized and thrown out of the tribe. And instead, they're able to upgrade that conversation. And I use upgrade consciously because it is a skill. It's not an innate skill. It's a skill that you have to train on and you have to work on. And to the extent that we, and I hate to include you in this, but I'll include me in this, as quasi-elders of our community, right, are able to teach the incoming younger folks that conversation's a skill, that we need to have that conversation with ourselves, that we need to think through and process what's happening to us. We're able to change the landscape of it. Because that's not the vision of medicine that I was given, right? But I think it's the vision that we're trying to give the next generation of folks. So I just want to wrap a circle around this, right? Because we've gone in a couple of different places, and we got to coalesce this a little bit. When bad things happen, your response to it is a choice, and it's a skill that has to be trained and developed, right? If you do it well, you produce somebody over time that is, generally speaking, healthier, more resilient, and more able to do both their job well and be a pillar of the community. If you don't do it well, over time, that builds up and explodes and breaks you down. And in the mission critical universe, the word we use to sort of tie all this together is residue, right? Residue is the natural result of an emotionally charged, challenging experience. Now, it could be good or bad. It could be the birth of a kid or a new love or the loss of a family member or a case that goes sideways and somebody dies. These things produce residue in us. When we feel that residue, it does not mean that we're broken. Residue is the natural course of human beings hitting hard things. That's it. You're not broken. You just experience the residue of the situation, and it's up to you what you do with it.
Yeah. MSA are supporting us on today's podcast, and I chose to partner with them because I've been wearing this stuff for nearly 20 years, and they are the global leader in development, manufacture, and supply of incredible, safe products that really protect people, not just our communities out there, but also first responders, most importantly, all over the world. Get yourself over to MSA and have a look at it. The high-performance protective clothing for emergency services responders. They also partner with us on the UK Pink Firefighters. It's because we love them. The helmets with the reflective visor, the F1XF, absolutely epic helmet. And not forgetting how they improve firefighter safety through their connectivity in the connected firefighter platform. That incorporates the M1SCBA, which is the tried and tested BA set. Everybody uses it in the UK Fire and Rescue Service. Then they combine that with the Luna module, which is a wireless all-in-one device, creating an independent search and rescue network, providing edge detection, enhanced personal thermal imaging, while simplifying post-scene reporting and data retention. Honestly, the edge detection element of it, go and check it out. Honestly, go and have a look on their website. Edge detection, it looks like the Matrix. It's absolutely awesome. In terms of an enhancement tool for search and rescue, it's literally unrivaled. MSA are always pushing the envelope, and it's a real privilege to be able to continue to grow our partnership together. So whether it's your PPE, your bunker gear, your helmets, your SCBA, your thermal imaging, your Luna, or your portable gas detection, both of us know that this equipment needs to work. It needs to be high quality, reliable, and dependable in the moment. And that's why I use MSA, because they know what's at stake. I suppose to try and layer, and I'm going to fumble my way through this, but you're looking for each experience to be like a clean burn. Like for us, when you have a clean burn, it gets rid of all of the residue. And it's almost a Stoic principle of, appreciating the things that are within your sphere of control and your sphere of influence, your thoughts, your actions, your training, your principles, your values, these things. But the outcome, no. Outcome's not in your sphere of control. Very rarely can you, but we want to. We want to take responsibility for that.
Well, because we want to save the kid. Right? Yeah. Like we want things to go well. We want our teammates to come home healthy and happy. We want the family whose son or daughter was shot to go home and have like Christmas next year. Like, of course we want that, right? Yeah. Like in the same way that Stoics want that, right? We can't pretend that we don't have these feelings or desires, but we also have to face the reality that we don't get to choose that all the time.
No. I think that can have, though, an associated coldness to it. Because like when people say, oh, you're quite stoic, or you have a stoic face, or you have a whatever, I think there's an underlying connotation with that you're cold, you lack empathy. I think that's a very hard circle to square in our heads, because you say, you gave the analogy there of it's just a Tuesday for you, and then maybe later on that Tuesday you're going to go meet your partner, and it's your anniversary, you're going for a walk with the Chihuahua, and you're going to see her parents, or
totally.
You're doing whatever, and you need to leave outcome behind, because that's not something you can carry. I heard a great quote the other day. They were like, the mountain you're carrying, you were only supposed to climb. There's all these difficult things that we have to do every day, but you just can't carry them around with you, because it's just not sustainable. It's just not sustainable to ask yourself to pick all of these things up and take you with you on the rest of your journey. Because ultimately for us, especially in the thing that we do, is we'll be replaced one day. There's a great podcast by Dr. Ranjan Chatterjee in the UK. And I'd strongly suggest, I forget what it's actually called, Live Better, something more. I can't remember what it is. I apologize. People don't know what it is. But he had a episode with Dr. Mo Gaudat, who's written a series of books. Very, very fascinating individual. And they were talking about this element of working hard versus working too hard. And working hard is great. It means you're a professional. It means you're very dedicated to the thing that you do. Working too hard bleeds into that unhealthy element where supposedly a lot of doctors don't take all of their annual leave. You've just had, like you say, a child's just come in, they've been shot, and they're on, emergency life support. You going off on leave tomorrow though, and you're like, I really should hang around and make sure that the outcome of this is what I need it to be. And that person doesn't need you, but you think they do. You're like, well, they need me, I'm their doctor. And you go, no, that person needs a doctor. They need medical help. They don't need you. The sad truth of it is you need them, because it gives you a sense of purpose, a sense of belief, reinforces who you are and what you do. Because the only people that will remember that you didn't take all your annual leave and that you went in on the weekends and that you stayed late are your family and your children and your loved ones. No one else is going to remember. There was hospitals long before Dan was alive, and they'll be here long after. The fire service was not waiting for Pete Wakefield to rescue it. And if I explode tomorrow, they'll be absolutely fine.
Yeah, for sure.
But it gives us such a sense of purpose, doesn't it? And we feel like we need it. And then that's why I think it's different than other professions. And it's probably harsh for me to say, and I'm stuck in my own internal bias, but we do take these professional setbacks so very personally, don't we?
I think it's that concept of this is a weird way to think about it, but where do I feel safe? Right? Sometimes to sit down and confront the mortality and the reality of what you just went through feels unsafe. And it feels safer to work more. Because work I understand, and at work I'm Dan, the emergency doctor who controls chaos and leads resuscitations. But at home, at night, I'm just Dan, the human that has to face the demons of what's happening. And I think a signal that you can really use if you're in this line of work is to ask yourself, do you feel more comfortable at work than you do anywhere else? And to some extent that's good, right? Like you want that tribe, you want that community, you want that everything, right? But but there's a time when it drifts across the line between a good tribe and a good space, and instead all of a sudden you are just avoiding other parts of reality. Yeah. And it's insidious. And I say that having felt that and gone through that and done that. And I remember very distinct times when I was like, everything is falling apart. All I want to do is be in the ER. Because as long as I'm there, the world makes sense.
Yep.
Right?
Clear rules, clear structure. I'm institutionalized.
Yeah. And it's such a permeable line that it's easy to step over it and not realize it. And I think we have to be pretty wary of that. We have to watch out for that and watch out for each other for that. Watch each other's backs to be like, hey man, like, are you picking up this shift because because what?
Don't want to be at home.
You don't want to be at home right now? Like, what does that say?
You talked about, before we recorded today, about that element of service without self-destruction, which I thought was a great title, by the way. It's probably a title for a book because I think it's very sticky, to use your words. You can't pour from an empty cup. So how do we do this thing and it not leave us broken, destroyed, empty vessels at the end of a long career? Because this is only one chapter of our life. This too shall pass. And if you make the thing you do 90% of your personality, who are you when you're no longer Dan the doctor?
I think that's a really important question in so many different layers to that. And the weird thing about it is, like, you can't pour from an empty cup, but you can sort of sometimes a little bit pour from an empty cup, right? Yeah. Like, you can make it through the next crisis usually. Like, we're professionals, right? You can come in sick and exhausted and, burnt up and whatever else, and you can still put it aside and see the next patient, fight the next thing for some time. And it's longer than it seems from the outside, right? Like you can do it a little bit, but that's not the right thing necessarily to do. And I think that's just really, really challenging to sort through. So I guess the first thing I'd say is, if you're listening to this and you're facing these challenges, like, one, it's okay that that's hard and that's a hard thing to dig into. I don't know that anybody has really solved this in any meaningful way. The other thing to say is that you're not alone going through this, right? And even if the people right around you aren't feeling it the same way, there are other people in other spaces in this universe that have hit crisis that are also hitting it, right? So I always think about, we might not be brothers, but we're cousins. Right? What you do and what I do are close enough that we understand the same language. We can have this conversation, even though I've never fought a fire, and I don't know how much emergency medicine you've done, but
very little to none.
We're cousins, right? We understand the context of it. We can have this talk about what it means to not know how to go home and have it real. So don't be afraid to reach out to your cousins, right? If you're a firefighter, come talk to an ER doctor. Talk to somebody in the military, talk to a police officer, like, find connections that aren't just your neighbors, but that are close enough to understand what you're doing. And to me, that's one of the most important things we do at Mission Critical, right? Is we create these bridges between these different communities. Because it's hard to listen to the person next to you. It's a little easier to listen to somebody just a little bit farther away. And I think that's really worth saying. So
because you can't see the picture when you're in the frame, when you're stuck in the thing that you do. And sometimes someone that's in a similar scenario, but certainly looking at it from a different perspective, say like road traffic collisions is an easy example. We're doing the first bit to get them out, and then we're stood there watching you do the rest. And then that person moves on, and the interconnecting link between all of us. It's the person in the thing going through the chaos, and we're custodians, we're guardians of them as they transition through each process. But we're each seeing the same experience through a different lens or from a different perspective. But we'll all seek some element of closure on that process and our ability to contextualize it and hopefully unpack it and make peace with it to some extent. I think that's something certainly that firefighters struggle with more, because we often don't know what happens to them after they're packaged up in the back of the ambulance. I think that causes a real element of trauma, because it's hard for you to close the loop on were we not successful. Some people don't care. Not that they don't care, but I think they find it easier to just draw a line through that and say that, well, there's a concept in the UK that actually a guy that works with the podcast, he does an app that we run, and he's come up with something called Trauma Card. And there may be an iteration of this in the US, I don't know, but it's a bit like a donor card where you sign up to say that if I am involved in a life-changing incident, I give authority for the emergency services to access the records so far as the outcome of what's happened, to give first responders some closure. So firefighters, police officers, paramedics can then look and say, where did this person go? What happened to them? And I don't know how that will manifest. He's working on it as we speak. But for people to be able to, because every now and again you'll get the odd letter or card, or the family might come and visit the fire department or the fire station, and I'm sure you have similar elements of it within hospitals. Very rare though, because that person's now moving on with their life. They probably want to forget it. They might be adapting to new life circumstances with a life-changing injury or a very difficult situation in their living circumstances due to some outcome of the incident. So you don't often get that kind of closure. But I absolutely believe, to echo back to what you've said, having those conversations with people that experience very similar from a different perspective will sometimes perhaps help you get out of your own echo chamber.
Right. And it also gives you the space to sit down and talk through some of the reality of it, right? To tell the stories in a way that makes sense. I mean, you and I can tell a story, and I can tell you a story that's full of blood and gore and horror and pain, and you can nod and understand it because it doesn't affect you the way it might affect somebody that doesn't live in our space. And you can tell me a story about somebody being burnt horribly and what the room smells like. And I'll know that smell, right? I know what you're saying. And we can have this conversation, and it creates a space where we're able to actually talk through some of the stuff that's going on. And in doing that storytelling, right, we actually process it and boil it and start making it into something else and something better in there. I think, you asked a little bit earlier, like, how do we have paraphrasing, but how do we have a career that is full of work with some sacrifice, but noble versions of it and without self-destruction? And how do we end up as that grandpa, grandma who is happy, healthy, and a pillar of the community, right? And I don't know that I know the answer to that. I'm working on it. We are, right? I think we have, projects around eldership and projects around transitions and projects around this cousin idea and, cadres and stuff like that. But I will say, we know what happens when we get it wrong.
Yeah.
We see it. And we know that the systems we have in place are probably better now than they were 10 or 20 years ago. Probably in some ways. But they're not perfect, and there's a lot of problems. And if we are not directly tackling this in our teams and in our communities, we're setting ourselves up for failure, right? We have to work on it. The FDNY in New York does this amazing thing where some subset of their folks who are heading to retirement, one of the last things they do, one of their last rotations in the service, is they get trained as peer counselors. So then when they retire, there's this army of them and they get a call. They're on call. They're still part of the community in one form or another. And they say, Johnny over at Firehouse 13 is drinking too much. We go talk to him. So, a bunch of these folks show up to Johnny's house and they go, "Hey, how's it going? We hear you're drinking too much." and they're there with love, and they're like, we love you, we care about you, we want you to be part of this community and healthy and resilient. We care about what you do. We need you in good shape. And you can't argue with that because of who they are. Right? And that's a great example of using eldership, of using the people, the sort of like, this is a bit, at the risk of a little flowery language here, to use like the sacred space that they create for being the people that have gone before us.
Yep.
Right? And that are able to teach us and guide us. I think that's a great example of that.
I think it helps on both sides of the coin as well, doesn't it? Because it helps
100%
them continue to find purpose in the thing that they do.
Absolutely. Right? We don't want to fall off a cliff when we leave our job.
Most
right?
do.
We want to be somebody that has investments in the community and that has a space and a sense of who we are, not who we used to be, although that's part of it, but who we are. Right? And I think that...
Because I think when people are in the job and they're going through those traumatic experiences, it's hard to see light at the end of the tunnel because they're not seeing someone who's been through something similar. There's a quote that an organization in the UK used where they say you've got to see it to be it. And if you can't see someone or see an example or see a future version of yourself that's gone through this valley, then it's not a light at the end of the tunnel thing. It's just a black cave. There is no light at the end of this tunnel. I am just falling into the abyss. But if you can see someone through the other side and says, look, I don't know your experience, I don't know your journey, but here's my experience. And again, echoing back to that, I don't think these are the same, but I think they might rhyme.
Exactly.
And here's some of the strategy solutions. Here's some of the mistakes I made. Here's some of the things I tried that definitely didn't work, that cost me my sanity, cost me my mental fitness, cost me my relationship, cost me a relationship with my children, with my family, with myself. That smashing of my own personal identity, and I was the one holding the hammer. I think there's a tremendous value to be taken from that, from both sides of it. Take me into the purpose, because there's, we keep sort of flirting and referencing it, and I know it'll have been done in the introduction a little bit, but we keep talking about this Mission Critical Team Institute. Sure. Help people understand what that is. Give us the elevator pitch on that and how you found yourself as part of this.
Absolutely. So
it is beyond a privilege to be able to bring the Firefighters podcast to you, and we are so grateful for every single person that supports, listens, shares, and follows our journey. But here's the honest truth. It takes a colossal amount of time and work to keep the podcast going. And to help us keep doing it, create more, reach more guests internationally, and make the podcast sustainable, we're asking for you to help. And to do this, we've set up a Patreon page. Now, by joining this, you'll not only support the future of the podcast, but also gain access to exclusive benefits. Now, if you've ever wanted to meet a member of the podcast, buy us a beer, buy us a coffee, and you think anything you've ever listened to on the podcast has been worth £3, that's basically what we're asking you for. By joining our Patreon community, you will get access to every single full episode archive we have ever made. Now, hundreds and hundreds of key documents that we've got in there on fire behavior, firefighter health, cancer risks, incident debriefs, and so much more. A growing collection of valuable resources to help you learn and grow. So by joining the Patreon for just £3, you'll unlock everything we've ever created, alongside discounts on merch, your support in whatever way, dropping it in the WhatsApp group, sharing it on the local newsletter, whatever it is. It's incredibly valuable, and we really do support it, and we need it to make it a long-lasting resource, that legacy resource we always talk about for first responders, firefighters, and everybody everywhere who's ever been interested in joining the fire service or who absolutely loves the job. Now, if you're already supporting something, as many people do, it's totally cool. You can still access the podcast for free, and you'll always be able to access all the new episodes for free, but we're asking for your help to make this sustainable. And if you want to do something free, follow us on our YouTube, subscribe to it, rate us on Spotify, whatever platform you listen to, and we want to keep growing, we want to keep sharing the insights, and we want to keep showcasing the incredible work happening in our community and our sector. So if you feel like you want to join the Patreon crew and help us make this possible, head to patreon.com/TFFPC or check the link in any episode podcast notes. Thank you for supporting us. We'll see you on the other side.
Mission Critical Team Institute, we are a group of people all over the world that work in service to teams operating in mission critical environments. right? Functionally, that means we work with the Allied Special Forces community, US, UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. We work with urban and wildland firefighters, folks in medicine that do hard things, trauma, emergency medicine, OB-GYN, stuff like that, and NASA, and a few others, right? And we work with these groups in service with them, side by side, on the success, sustainability, and survivability of mission critical teams. Functionally, that means we help people, teams, and organizations that go out and do extraordinarily hard things. The things that are the tips of spears in one direction or another. Mm-hmm. We work on selection and assessment. We work on performance in those moments. We work on how to come home safely and well and still be a human. We work on building community, and then also this really powerful this word that we don't say all that often, communitas, right? So communitas is the group of other human beings that are indoctrinated into the same or similar tribe as you that do the hard things that you're doing. They know what it's like when that thing goes bump in the night and you're there for it, right? And to me, that incorporates this cousin idea, right? So technically, you and I are not necessarily in the same communitas, but if you stretch it, if you make the cousin argument, then we're enough in there that we fight crisis and chaos together.
And the methodologies and the frameworks that we'll utilize will be very transferable. Very transferable.
Absolutely.
What have you learned from the people that you've worked with there? Was there any underlying assumptions or myth-busting analogies? Like I often think of this with our comparisons to high-performing sports environments. We don't always have the privilege of operating like high-performing sports teams. I don't always think they're good analogies to apply onto even corporations, certainly not elements of our first responder community, because I don't think they're the same. I just don't think you can apply the same methodologies as high performance sports teams that you can. I'd love it if we could, but I always use like the analogy of the All Blacks, one of the most successful teams in sport in history. Their motto is "No dickheads." You can't always write that on the wall of the hospital. That doesn't work.
Probably
the premise behind it, premise behind it might work, but we can't be as cutthroat as that. Even though, arguably, as I've already alluded to, I would argue sometimes the outcome is more severe in that there is inherent life and death involved in what we do.
Sure. I mean, I think one of the differences, between sport and folks that operate in mission critical environments is the bounded uncertainty of it. Right? Sport, basketball, you're playing, there's, X number of people on the court at any one time. You're going to face the same number of people. You understand the rules. It's not like you're going to get on the court and be like, oh shit, the guy across from me is actually a bear with a chainsaw. Now what am I going to do? Right? Like you've prepared for the circumstance, and still there's challenge and there's sport and there's complexity and teamwork and all these other things. So there are components that are portable. But honestly, sometimes in your life, like maybe you might find a bear with a chainsaw. Like I hope not. That'd be terrifying, right? But like you get whatever the equivalent of an unexpected bear with a chainsaw is. I don't know why I'm fixated on this metaphor, but the idea is that it works. Let's go with it. Yeah, where is the uncertainty and how much is it, and what are you fighting in there, right? Yeah. You asked, so I think there's some parallels, obviously, and you want to take what you can take in both directions and be open to learning from everybody, even though it doesn't necessarily port over. But you asked earlier what I learned from working with these groups, and it is such a privilege to be in these spaces with these strong, fucking noble men and women that are out there trying to do good work. Right? Like that's just like restores your faith in humanity to be around these people for sure. And there was this TV commercial in the 80s in the US about a hair club for men, right? Which regrows hair or whatever. And the guy on the commercial would always be like, I'm not just the president of Hair Club for Men, I'm also a user. And then he'd you'd look at his head or whatever. Clearly this hasn't helped me knowing this knowledge about Hair Club for Men. But I actually think that's a really good metaphor for what being part of this organization is like, right? Like, I'm not just the chief medical officer of it. I'm also I'm the user of it, right? I am myself a changed human being and better able to process residue, better able to work with the relationships in my life and to be the man I want to be because I am in this space, because I'm talking to people that are cousins in other disciplines, and we're able to have these conversations in a way that I never was able to have earlier, right? So you're seeing the resilience play itself out. You're seeing the changing shape of it, and I know the direction that I was heading before a lot of this stuff happened, right? So you can see the difference in it. So it is taught so much to be in that space, and it is truly. It's truly an honor to get to serve in that space and to serve these teams. I have, over the last chunk of time, stepped a little bit back from the ER floor. So I'm seeing less patients these days and doing more of the mission critical work, trying to be that centerpiece of community and communitas. For
you can't
teams.
fix the thing while you're in the thing. It's like business, isn't it? I always say you can't work on your business when you're working in your business. You almost need to step back from it to be able to build some cognitive bandwidth, to be able to be part of the change that you know is necessary from your own lived experiences.
Right, and hopefully we can make a big impact and make a big difference in a lot of these universes and teams. Get these conversations going, get this training going, and get folks.
There's the old funny meme where the guys are whipping the horse, two farmers, as hard as they can, and Henry Ford or whoever turns up with a wheel and says, "Fellas." Yeah, and they say, we're too busy to make improvements at the minute. You're just like, let's just keep whipping the horse as hard as we can. I haven't got time to make improvements. We don't seem to have time to do it right the first time, but we always seem to have time, money, and resources to do it 2, 3, 4, or 5 times, don't we? And it's so hard.
It's well said.
It is so hard because you can't. It's not a business. We can't just shut this down and go, guys, this ain't working. Let's take a pause. Let's take the product off the market for 6 months and do some R&D and some innovation, because
it's liminal,
we seem to be creating
right?
victims inside our own organization way too often.
Yeah, but we're in there and it's going, and the only way out is through. So the question is, how do you steer the ship from the inside? Or that's probably a terrible metaphor, but you know what I mean?
No, yeah. I want to be respectful of your time, but I know we've spoke very little about the Emergency Mind Project. So for people that are unfamiliar, they'll be able to go and find your podcast on all platforms. You've done well over 100-something episodes now. I see this as a great analogy for cousins and sisterhood and brotherhood and all of this stuff. What have you learned through that? Because we spoke about it before we started. Doing the podcasts and being able to listen back to them and have that element of self-reflection. What's some of the key takeaways that you've found that's obviously seems to be continually fueling your insatiable desire to try and help?
Absolutely. One of the first questions you asked me on this was how do people get it wrong when they start facing pressure-filled situations? And actually, I think this is a good example of that. So when I started down this path, it was a lot of how do I perform better in the moment of impact? I know stuff more than I'm able to get out of my head into my hands into the patient. So how do I get better in that moment? Right? Which is an awesome thing to ask. But one of the things I've come to realize, the more different types of experts I work with, is that was probably too narrow of a question. Right? Thinking just about the moment of impact is probably too narrow. You really have to think about the whole system around it. So these days, I tend to think about this cycle of prepare, perform, recover, evolve. And that virtuous cycle, I think, is incredibly important. So performance is pretty obvious, right? It's the moment of impact. Preparation is how did you make decisions before on your off days? How did you set yourself up? What are you studying? What are you training? Right? Recover is what happens immediately afterwards, to include just physical, mental recovery, but also sleep and rest and nutrition and everything else. And then evolution is, well, when are you taking the time to look back and be like, what happened? What am I going to do differently? And what's my next experiment that I'm going to run? and it feeds naturally into prepare. So you have this incredible loop: prepare, perform, recover, evolve. That was such a gift from talking to experts about this and piecing that together that I didn't have in place before I started doing this work.
I think that cyclic process is something that's takes a tremendous amount of self-awareness. I often find if I don't have that sort of mindset, you can just end up colliding straight into the next emergency. And there's a great book, Going Pro. I forget who it was, but if I try and think about it with the podcast, I'm like, if I treated this like a professional, how prepared would I be for Dan and our conversation? And I think if you can apply that analogy, even like a performance analogy from athletics, what would I do if tomorrow was the World Cup? How would I prepare today? Because for somebody, when you turn into work tomorrow, it is going to be the worst day of their life. How would I want to show up, and be the doctor, be the firefighter, be the police officer, be the paramedic that my family think I am? I think that's helpful for me and disciplines my preparedness. But thank you so much for your time today, brother. I know we're tight on time. I'd love to have you back on in the future at some point in time. I know you're a busy man, but please send my love to your partner, to your dog, to all the team. And I look forward to speaking to you in the future.
Dude, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thank you for what you and your team are doing. And for the folks listening, thank you guys for digging into this and working to get better.
Well, that's it for today, folks. Hope you took a lot away from that episode. We started the Firefighters podcast to develop, inspire, connect, motivate, represent, and most importantly, celebrate the world of incredible emergency services operators and the wider sector through this series of wide-ranging conversations. We really love creating this podcast and bringing it to so many people. Did you know you can also find these on YouTube? We do a lot of video podcasts now. You can head over to our YouTube page and subscribe there. And as a final ask from us, whatever platform you're on, please rate the podcast. It really helps us as a key performance indicator to reach more and more people. I've been your host, Pete Wakefield. This has been the Firefighters podcast. And wherever you are in the world, please stay safe, be happy, live with intention, and where possible, please remember and support your firefighters and first responders. I'll see you next time.